The concept of national borders as we know it today is a relatively new one. In fact, most of the states in the world today did not exist before World War II, and the ones that did exist had porous borders.
European colonialism played a key role in redrawing borders in much of the world and carving out state boundaries over lands that were inhabited by indigenous groups. This led to a number of border conflicts in different parts of the globe, many of which continue to this day.
In this video, we'll focus on one such border dispute in North America, and it's not along the US-Mexico border.
Instead, we'll be looking at the northern edge of the United States.
Let's head over there right now.
This is Akwesasne, a Mohawk reservation split between several nations and states. The yellow part of the map is the region of Akwesasne that is in the state of New York in the US. The area in green is in the province of Quebec in Canada, and the portion in red is in the province of Ontario in Canada. The solid line is the US-Canada border, and the dotted line is the Quebec-Ontario border. The Canadian side of Akwesasne is home to approximately 12,000 people, and the US side has an estimated 11,000 residents. From the Mohawk point of view, Akwesasne rests at the meeting place of not two, but three different nations: Canada, the United States, and the Mohawk. And the boundary between Canada and the United States cuts right through the Akwesasne reservation. In 1794, the United States and Britain signed the Jay Treaty, which proclaimed, among other things, the right of indigenous people to travel freely across the border.
In fact, when that border was put here after the War of 1812, there was a promise that this was our land on both sides of the river. That's an imaginary line. And the elders I've heard say that that imaginary line goes 20 feet above our heads. That's not for us. That's for you.
But the implementation of the treaty is more aspirational than real. If you're an Akwesasne resident traveling from one side of the territory to the other, you have to show your passport at either US Customs and the Immigration Station or the Canadian Customs and Immigration Station, depending, of course, on which side of the border you're traveling from.
Historically, this border crossing has been the site of much tension and conflict, especially between the residents of Akwesasne and the Canadian Border Security Agency. One incident in particular highlights the issues underlying the ongoing border tensions. In 2008, the Canadian government announced that it would start arming its border guards with 9mm Beretta handguns. Mohawk leaders immediately responded to the announcement by declaring their opposition to the policy. They cited several reasons for wanting an exception made in the policy for the Cornwall border crossing. 1. They considered the Cornwall border crossing to be on Mohawk's sovereign land. While the U.S. Customs and Immigration Station was in Massena, New York, the Canadian Customs and Immigration Station was on Cornwall Island, which is part of the Akwesasne territory. What further escalated the tensions was that Akwesasne was never consulted on the decision to arm the Canadian Guards. 2. They were concerned that arming the border guards would result in an increase in human rights violations. There had been ongoing incidents of harassment of residents at Akwesasne by some of the border guards, which included shoving and strip-searching elders and detaining parents taking their children to school. The residents were concerned that arming the guards, especially those that had been involved in racial profiling and harassment, would escalate human rights abuses.
There was not once a woman that was brought out, considering that I'm a woman, and not once did they ask me if I needed to go inside because I was clearly cold. At some point I was walking in circles just to keep warm or jumping up and down, looking around like, am I gonna be okay? And not once did they ask me, because of the radiation that they're emitting, and I'm a female, did they ever ask me that if I was pregnant, and I was pregnant. And so come to find out, this machine was called a vacuum machine, and it emits enough uranium to go through
depleted uranium.
11 inches of steel.
And 3, the Cornwall border post was situated in a residential area at a major crossroad where a bus stop, recreational fields, a play area, and several small businesses were located. Arming border guards in this area would increase risk to bystanders, and many residents were worried about the safety of their children.
In early May 2009, an estimated 400 Akwesasne residents began protesting the new gun policy, which was scheduled to go into effect on June 1st, 2009. They gathered under a tent that was set up close to the Cornwall Island border post. Just before midnight on May 30th, 2009, all border guards at the Cornwall border post abandoned the post, citing safety concerns and fearing retaliation from the community.
North Country Public Radio out of Canton also did a very good job. One of their reporters, David Summersing, did a very in-depth inquiry into the issues, going back about 10 years, about some of the issues that had occurred at the bridge, where, elders were forced to get out of their vehicles, children off of school buses, elders getting roughed up by the Canadian Border Patrol, and these kinds of issues. If you look at print media, particularly like the Courier Observer and North Country This Week, it was less insightful. There was a big difference between public radio coverage, television coverage, and the print media. And particularly in the print media, when people can post letters to the editor anonymously, they can say anything they want, and they did. They really did.
Although the protesters maintained a presence at the tent, at no point did they block the road to the bridge. Nonetheless, vehicular traffic onto the bridge was shut down by police on both sides of the border. Local residents protested for months to oppose the arming of the guards on their territory. The number of protesters fluctuated on a daily basis, with those at the tent representing extended families, people from the Elder Center, and from volunteer organizations. Fires burned to keep demonstrators warm. In the meantime, closing the border crossing caused businesses that relied on cross-border traffic to lose revenue. Businesses in Cornwall, Messina, and the reservation reported significant losses for each day that the bridge remained closed. On July 13th, 42 days into the standoff, the bridge was reopened when a temporary border post was created at the northern end of the bridge in the city of Cornwall with armed border guards. Although the Canadian federal government did not reverse its decision to arm border guards, it was decided that the border crossing on Cornwall Island would be permanently moved off the reservation, closer to the city of Cornwall on the north shore of the bridge. In many ways, the peaceful protest staged by Akwesasne residents was a success, since it managed to push armed border guards off their territory, effectively ended the occupation, and eliminated the threat of violence that the guards posed to local residents.
For many Akwesasne residents, border crossings are a part of everyday life. Roughly 70% of the border post traffic consists of Mohawks from Akwesasne, many of whom travel within the reserve. But crossing this border is no simple task for Akwesasne residents.
In 2014, a new port of entry was established in the city of Cornwall. This new border is geographically out of many people's way. For instance, many of the people traveling to Cornwall Island, which is part of the Akwesasne Mohawk Reserve, are residents from St. Regis, the New York part of the reservation. In order to get to Cornwall Island, they must cross the St. Lawrence River into Ontario first. This means they have to pass through the island. Once they make it through the checkpoint in Cornwall, they have to turn around and drive south to return to Cornwall Island. The entire ordeal can take up to 2 hours with heavy traffic, though the wait time is said to have improved.
Residents who have entered the island without reporting at the Cornwall checkpoint have been charged with criminal offenses, had their cars impounded, and fined up to $1,000.
Underlying the border tensions is a question of sovereignty.
From the point of view of the Canadian and American governments, the Akwesasne territory is unquestionably Canadian on the Canadian side of the border and American on the American side of the border.
But the Mohawk believe that Akwesasne belongs to the Mohawk Nation, that it's part of a sovereign country that is neither American nor Canadian. Many Akwesasne council members and residents believe that the border should not apply to them by right of treaty.
But for Canadian legislation to change in favor of Akwesasne residents, the Canadian government would have to take into account the indigenous notion of sovereignty. Until that happens, Akwesasne residents will continue to live under the surveillance of Canadian and U.S. border security and face a daily threat of being charged.
We have the right to ourselves, governing ourselves. When you have somebody laying laws on you and you say, where did you get that authority to do that? There's nothing that's more greater than life, nature itself.
A lot of people are making an effort to teach to preserve what we have. And that includes treaty rights. To keep it going, we have to practice it. You have to practice our sovereignty. And I think that's why this protest in 2009 was to reaffirm that sense of this is our home, this is our country. Your laws do not necessarily pertain to us. But the truest sense of the word of sovereignty, that's a tough one to really call. But basically we're hanging on to what we do know, what we do have, and it's strengthening. Knowing your rights, knowing your treaties, not being pushed around, knowing it's right to stand up and to reestablish and reaffirm those rights. Because if you don't reaffirm them and maintain them, they'll just disappear.